Hi, my name is Nicholas Tampio, and I am excited to deliver my third lecture on the evolution of academic freedom. And the first two lectures were more about the philosophical foundations of academic freedom. So we went back to late 18th, early 19th century Germany, where they came up with the notion of Lehrfreiheit. And then we went to the beginning of the 20th century, where American philosophers, particularly John Dewey, but some other people, were inventing the modern notion of tenure that sort of becomes part of university handbooks, at least in the United States, and guarantees tenure. Right in this lecture, I want to go to the present, right? We've done our homework. We're in the present. I want us to participate intelligently in debates about academic freedom. So first, I'm just going to say academic freedom is under siege around the world. A few years ago, I organized a letter writing campaign, an Amnesty International campaign with one of my colleagues at Fordham University, Annika Hinze, and we wrote letters to Turkish politicians. And basically, the government was putting cronies in powerful positions and firing dissident academics, right? Just complete violation of academic freedom and tenure in Turkey. So we were trying to mobilize. The situation in Russia is a mess. I'm friends with Evgeny Roskin. He wrote an article for a journal I edit. I'm an editor of the Journal of Politics, and his article is about sort of the subtle forms of pressure of censorship that happens in Russia. So it's very hard for academics to criticize the government in Russia. Um, Here's an article I was reading this afternoon about academic freedom in India and how that if you criticize the government, there's going to be pressure on you to get fired or to change what you're saying. And I've done a few webinars with Indian academics, and they don't want me publicizing it or recording it or anything that would put it on the government's radar. So all around the world, academic freedom is a very precarious accomplishment. And America, I would say it's different. I mean, if you have any sort of historic perspective, America has it pretty good. I mean, the first lecture, I was describing how I myself write lots of op-eds and criticize powerful people, and criticize presidents and governors and legislators and billionaires, and my job has been safe. So I don't want to exaggerate the threat, but I've kept my job, right? There have been occasions like my friend Maura Finkelstein who's lost her job. So it's definitely still precarious. So today I want to discuss briefly three cases of what's happening in Ohio, at Harvard, at Muhlenberg College. If you had said, Professor Tampio, give us three new examples, I could have swapped in Columbia University, Indiana University, Texas, all over the place, right? We're in a form of McCarthyism right now. I'm very grateful that Mary Ruiz invited me to participate in this speaker series with Alt Liberal Arts. It's a global education initiative concerned with academic freedom and civic engagement in the liberal arts. You can take courses with the Bard College and the Open Society University Network. And I'd like to thank everybody who's helped make this possible, including people in the back. And I'm really excited to talk with Pat Hoker, former president of New College, at the end of today's discussion. So what I want to do is go through these three cases. I want to use the device of the Cephalus problem. So sometimes you'll see things about the neoliberal academy impinging on academic freedom. I want to argue that it goes back to at least Plato's Republic, right? That you need rich people to support universities, and yet rich people don't want to be insulted. They want you to be honored. They want you to honor them. They want you to name buildings after them. Right? So there's the fine line. I mean, the Cephalus problem is how you get the support of rich people without allowing them to control the curriculum, right? And as, I think that's going to be a problem as long as society exists as we know it. So I want to just end with a few thoughts about how to defend academic freedom today. I've got some thoughts. I mean, I want to try to figure out how to bring in those great ideals of Wissenschaft and Bildung and Lehrfreiheit, and I want to figure out how to bring them into the present. So John Dewey and other founders of the AAUP took on this assignment a century ago. Now it's our turn to try to figure out how to make that ideal attractive. So in Ohio, I realized this because I've multiple friends, but one friend in particular has been very vocal about Senate Bill 1. It guts academic freedom and reshapes Ohio's public universities. Interestingly, the state senator who sponsored it is really emphatic that it doesn't infringe academic freedom. And that's good, right? You want politicians to say that they're not infringing academic freedom because once they do that, then you've got some leverage. You could say, well, if you believe in academic freedom, then you need to do X, Y, and Z. So we want politicians, even if they're being hypocritical, even if they're being insincere, we still want them to pay lip service to academic freedom. So here's one thing about what's happening in Ohio is that the Board of Trustees for any of the public universities in Ohio must prohibit any orientation or training course regarding diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so Isaac Kamola is a professor at Trinity University, and he wrote this report for the AAUP called Manufacturing Backlash, Right-Wing Think Tanks and Legislative Attacks on Higher Education, 2021 to 2023. So what Professor Kamola says is this is exactly the kind of political interference warned about in the AAUP's 1915 declaration. I actually disagree. My view is that DEI offices are protected under institutional autonomy, but not technically academic freedom. So institutional autonomy means that certain schools can proceed without the interference of the state. So the notion that like Ohio State University can just do its thing without the governor interfering, that's institutional autonomy. The problem is that institutional autonomy can work against academic freedom. And if you ask me, that's what can happen with DEI offices. They're right, they're appointed, they're hired, they're not academics per se, they're not scholars per se. So right, that I mean, the whole notion of academic freedom is that you've earned this incredible privilege by getting your doctorates, by going through peer review, by working independently, and you're allowed, like the part about independence is you're allowed to criticize DEI policies, whereas if you're hired to sort of work into the DEI office, you have to do what you're told to do, right? So we could talk more about this. I want to acknowledge that there's two sides to the story. I myself think that academic freedom does not protect, DEI offices. There's a requirement about intellectual diversity. So this law requires intellectual diversity rubrics and affirm and declare that faculty and staff shall allow and encourage students to reach their own conclusions about all controversial beliefs or policies and shall not seek to indoctrinate any social, political, or religious point of view. I mean, whoever wrote this, have read the AAUP documents and they were using the language. You could decide whether it's being sincere or not. I won't read this thing, but basically, I agree. I'm a John Stuart Millian. I believe you should consider the strongest arguments opposed to your own. One of the things that John Stuart Mill says is that part of being a scholar or a thinker means most of your life is spent reading people you disagree with. And I agree with that, right? So that strikes me as part of just good being a strong thinker. You need to be able to, if you believe in capitalism, you need to rebut communism. If you're communism, you need to read the best capitalist thinkers, right? And one of the things that Max Weber and the AAUP document emphasizes that you shouldn't expect your students to agree with you politically. So I'm against indoctrination. For me, the devil's in the details, right? How are you going to enforce intellectual diversity? What is that going to look like? Are you going to fire faculty for not doing intellectual diversity? I mean, there's two ways to get intellectual diversity. You have a department and you have one conservative and one liberal, and you let the conservative be full scale conservative, and then you let the liberal be full scale liberal, and then the students get to hear from both sides, or do you try to make the conservative teach the liberal's point of view equally, and the liberal professor teach the conservative point of view equally? I mean, that strikes me as a mess, right? That's all of a sudden you're interfering with the right of professors to run their own class and assign their own materials. So for me, the devil's in the details. We don't quite know the details just yet. There's requires a mandatory American civic literacy course. And so there's the Constitution, the Declaration, the Federalist Papers, right? Martin Luther King, the Wealth of Nations. As it turns out, I've taught all of those things. So it's not so much that I'm against teaching those things, but I don't really love a state senator telling me what I need to teach. So politicians interfering with curriculum violates Lehr Freiheit. So, that's just the earliest definition of Lehr Freiheit is just professor gets to choose which books to teach, right? That in Germany in the early 19th century, there were no campuses, there were no residential life. Basically, universities were just a building with a lecture hall. And so the basic meaning is that the teacher in the lecture hall could choose what to teach. So if you're coming in and saying you got to teach this course with all of these authors, that's violating the letter of the law. I mean, what's a little complicated is that you have to hire people to teach this course, and like if they're given some freedom to teach some additional material, that could be a silver lining. So I don't love it, but I could hate it more. I mean, I could hate it more. So a summary of Ohio's situation, professors can still make their own syllabi. We think, right, the details could come out. Students can choose their own courses, have their own political ideology. The politicians are all committed to academic freedom. Here's my question. What does it look like in practice? What does the intellectual diversity requirement look like? I mean, is that going to be an ideology test? Is it going to be post-tenure reviews, right? And we're not talking about Florida, but I was reading the Florida legislation about post-tenure reviews, and there's nothing about ideology. So, it's not red alert just yet, but, part of the beauty of tenure is you just don't have to be looking over your shoulder about politicians coming from you. So post-tenure reviews sort of weakens that protection. So last time I was asked the question, what do you do if you're a professor in a red state or you're in a state that's not sympathetic to higher education? I mean, for me, the situation is this, is that Ohio is going to be competing for professors with other universities and colleges all around the country. And so if they become much, much worse than comparable schools in other parts of the country, right? If Boston is a beacon of academic freedom, you know, people in academic promising academics are going to choose to go to Boston, or if they're at Ohio, they're going to choose to go to Boston. So the fact is that, if you want a good university, you kind of have to just tolerate academics doing their thing. So, this bill is alarming, alert, or maybe, I'm on alert about it, but it doesn't quite strike me as bad as it could be. I'd like to hear your thoughts. All right, let's talk about Harvard. I would say, I'm on higher alert about what's happening at Harvard. You know, like a lot of us, it's been primetime television. If you're on Twitter, it's primetime tweets. I literally could easily spend an hour talking about the Harvard case, nonstop letters from Trump officials and Harvard responses. But basically, what happened is that Bill Ackman was one of the most prominent critics of Harvard's response to October 7th, 2023. And he just tweeted about it. And, one of the things that I'm arguing is that higher education always has to figure out its relationship with wealthy people who support it. Bill Ackman is the type of person I have in mind when I talk about the syphilis problem, right? The whole republic happened because Cephalus left the scene. Bill Ackman is the Cephalus who didn't leave the scene, who is very upset about it, right? He was very upset about his daughter becoming a Marxist or something like that. Or really, I think the more honest thing was that his daughter was becoming less enthusiastic about Zionism. That's my take on it. You can read lots of articles. But they succeeded in firing Claudine, and the fact is Claudine Gay didn't help her case because there was some concerns about plagiarism. I know people who've said, what are her credentials? She didn't publish a book, but I'm a political scientist. She's a political scientist. There are the main three journals in political science that can make your own career in political science if you publish in these journals. And she's published in those top journals. So for me, that's not a scandal. I also think it's a scandal about the Harvard response to anti-Semitism. But she left herself vulnerable with the plagiarism. All right, so the Trump administration wrote a letter to Harvard, April 11th, 2025. I mean, this is by Josh Groenbaum. There's another letter by Kristi Noem, the Secretary of Homeland Security. I mean, they're saying you need to offer viewpoint diversity for each department, field, or teaching unit. I mean, that's a crazy expectation. I mean, are you going to have to go through and make sure that you have enough communists in the business school, or that you have enough, Muslims in the Middle East department? I mean, you know, there's the subtext, and the subtext becomes the text when you read about the point about anti-Semitic harassment, and that was Bill Ackman's main concern, right? I'm not exactly sure what they wanted universities to do. Did you just want to stop students from flying flags? Did you want them to stop protesting at all? Did you want to stop op-eds? I mean, one of the things that this letter said is that they have to end a bunch of groups that have participated in anti-Semitic activity, including Students for Justice in Palestine, some other groups. You know, I'm not being original here when I say they seem to be conflating pro-human rights, pro-Palestine with anti-Semitic. Right? We're in the middle of a public battle between, anti-Zionist Jews and Zionist Jews, and the Zionist Jews happen to be, much higher number, I would say, but it's important to realize that there are anti-Zionist Jews who are being very active and saying, don't conflate the two. Trump, we don't need you to support us. But of course, there are other people who seem to be supportive of the Trump administration, right? The ADL is one of the main groups. Harvard's reply, they wrote this thing saying the promise of American higher education, freedom of thought and inquiry, along with the government's longstanding commitment to respect and protect it, has enabled universities to contribute in vital ways to a free society and to healthier, more prosperous lives for people everywhere. All of us share a stake in safeguarding that freedom. That's good, right? That's definitely good. I mean, a lot of academics were happy about this response. I mean, if you see this screenshot there, there's a picture referring to research about Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and diabetes. I get why Harvard did that. I get why President Garber did that, right? Because who could be against breakthrough medical interventions? That's like a no-brainer. I mean, what I would have liked to have seen is a defense of humanities professors and social science professors, and defending Socrates, defending the people who are criticizing the city. It's very easy for me to say. I'm not the president of Harvard, which is a multi-billion-dollar operation, keeps thousands of people employed. Maybe you don't want to. That's not the time for a philosophical debate. You just need to go to your best argument, and don't bring up anything that could complicate the argument. Again, I could keep talking about Harvard. I'll move. I just want to show this one slide from Steven Pinker. He wrote an op-ed in the New York Times. For what it's worth, I have experienced no anti-Semitism in my 2 decades at Harvard, and nor have any prominent Jewish faculty members, including Cass Sunstein, who said, I went here as an undergrad in the 1970s. I've been here in the 80s, 90s, right, all the way up to the present. No anti-Semitic incidents. So I want to be clear, anti-Semitism is wrong, should be stopped. I don't necessarily think that's what's happening here. I'll skip the summary here. Let's go to Muhlenberg College. Maura Finkelstein, she lives in New York City. We're friends. I invited her to Fordham to give a talk. We had dinner. She told me all the details about all of her things, right? A student cited in the Office of Civil Rights said this professor has not brought our views into class this week, which has helped me feel more safe. I mean, if you've been following academic politics for very long, you'll realize that conservatives have been making fun of liberals for safety talk. And so now all of a sudden they've realized, hey, we can use these offices of civil rights. We can use this safety talk to try to get professors fired or silenced, right? Because the point is partly to send a message to other faculty that you could get fired too. Title VI, which prohibits discrimination on the basis of national origin, shared Jewish ancestry. So that's in the OCR report. I think it's very problematic if you interpret Title VI this way, right? Because it's opening up the door to you can't criticize Israel because that's the historic homeland of the Jewish people, which is shared national ancestry. You're, all of a sudden you can't criticize a country or a state. I mean, political scientists, political theorists. I mean, that's what we do. Like, and then if you're using if you're using this criterion, it's going to apply to India too with Hindutva. So, for me, this is the issue that I'm most paying attention to, right? This is the new McCarthyism that in the olden days it was communism, now it's anti-Semitism. In both cases, it's a way to sort of one faction to get revenge on another group of academics. So I don't like it. Right. And so the AAUP report wrote I won't read the whole thing, but basically, they violated her academic freedom. They violated her due process. So, if people have questions, I'm happy to talk about the specifics of the case. It's not black and white. Like I said earlier, I don't love the social media post that she shared. I wouldn't have shared it, but like I was trying to explain last time, maybe we need more Diogenes, the cynics, right? Maybe we need people who are not mild-mannered professors. So here's my recap. Academics still face the cephalus problem. Universities need the financial support of trustees, alumni, politicians, right? I don't think you should say lump it or leave it. That's not a good strategy because plenty of politicians will say, well, we'll just stop funding higher education, or families will say, we'll stop paying tuition. And then you, then the whole problem dissipates in the wrong way. So these people, the trustees, alumni, politicians, have an ambivalent relationship at best to academic freedom, right? They don't quite get it, I don't think. So we academics need to convince politicians and the public to fund higher education and leave us alone. That's the magic thing we want to get. And we haven't enough. I mean, I haven't, right? I mean, I have academic freedom, but it's an ongoing task, right? I mean, I'm part of an ecosystem and I want the ecosystem to be healthy. And so when I see academics in other parts of the world or other parts of the country suffering, not having academic freedom, I feel like it's affecting me. I want there to be good researchers and scholars around the world. So here's a couple ideas. One, emphasize the importance of university research, right? So this is Alan Garber at Harvard, groundbreaking innovations across a wide range of medical, engineering, and scientific fields. That's a no-brainer. That's a good one. But I also think you want to emphasize the value added of humanities and social sciences. I think it's good for professors to write for newspapers, right? Then all of a sudden the student body says, oh, Professor Tampio, he wrote an article in Newsweek. Cool, I know him, right? Or online events, something like this, but other type things that they're public debates, right? Universities can host presidential debates or host gubernatorial candidate debates or um, host conferences or weekend retreats or all these kinds of things, offer short courses, right? I mean, I think that would be, I think professors have a lot of wisdom and for summer course or for alumni or for guest student days to have, sit in on guest lectures. There's lots of ways which we can speak to the public and say, hey, I see the value of having somebody who specializes in the Italian Renaissance. I just got a great lesson on Michelangelo, or somebody who's, studies German Romanticism and can give a great lecture about the great German Romantic philosophers. Like you want to figure out a way to broadcast to the public that it's important that society find a space for scholars. You could do it different ways, but the way that we do it in the United States is higher education. An idea that might not be obvious, but I think you want to hire dissidents. You want to hire outspoken people, but I think it's just prudent to have different kinds of dissidents. So if you're a Democrat, you could say, you know what, it's awesome that Princeton created a job for Cornell West. But Princeton is also very smart that they created a position for Robbie George, right? He has the James Madison Center at Princeton University, and they bring in conservative scholars and top scholars, serious scholars. And so the fact is now, people on the left can say, hey, Princeton is, awesome. And then people on the right can be, Princeton is, hiring some really smart people who argue for positions that we like. So I think that, academic freedom, the legal thing is the extreme. You want to be prudent before you get to that limit condition. And so I think part of being prudent is trying to figure out how can we be good citizens in our communities and do what we're good at, right? So we should be insistent on the academic mission, but we can also say the mission is consistent with making our lives better. All right. So that last point was like Wissenschaft, right? I was trying to explain University of Wissenschaft. So that's just between you and me, or the audience, right? I'm trying to figure out how do you explain Wissenschaft to the populace. You don't want to use the German word, but you just want to say universities are places that offer a little bit of everything. That's all interconnected. So whatever your interests are, universities are going to provide some sort of home for it. All right, now I want to figure out how to describe the language of Bildung, cultivation. We got to make the liberal arts attractive. And I sometimes talk to my friend Melvin Rogers, who's a professor at Brown University, and we both talk about reading college brochures when we were in high school, and we're like, I want to be part of this. This looks awesome, right? And so here I just found a few images from Fordham website, right? The weekend he participated at graduation like event. I mean, one of America's top one of the world's top musicians, right? Played at the Super Bowl. Here he is dancing with Ramsey, I think his name is, with what was his name? Was it Jimmy Fallon? And then you get lots of students becoming friends with different types of students, right? So it's a cliche, but it's a good cliche, right? Lots of different types of students hanging out, beautiful campus. We've got Denzel Washington, Fordham grad. You get to play guitar in your room. You get to participate in theater or watch theater. So make it clear that it is a great place to grow as a writer, researcher, public speaker, Bildung, right? Just, I think we need to lean into it and not feel ashamed of it. Some philosopher like John Rawls will say public reason means trying to avoid controversial metaphysical statements or controversial moral or philosophical statements when you're justifying a just basic structure of society. I disagree with him. I don't think you're going to be able to support higher education if you use the principle of liberal legitimacy. I think you just have to say it's a vision of the good life, and we want to sell it, and we want to convince enough legislators and trustees and families that it's wonderful to participate in this. This is a glorious time for you to grow as a person, to study abroad, to intern, to do your own research, Forschung in German, right? That where this is a place where you can really grow, which is how John Dewey translated Bildung. And then I think we should offer higher education presented as a utopia. It's just an amazing place to grow as individuals, to make new friends, to have the thrill of intense debate, right? I think that's the way to to turn the tables, right? We could say Muhlenberg University, you should be proud of Maura Finkelstein, right? She's putting the university, sort of making it a national presence, and she's challenging people to think about things. I mean, she shouldn't be allowed. There's conditions about what she can do in the classroom, but as long as she's not violating those conditions and she's just being a controversial intellectual, that's great. You want to be part of that, right? You don't want to go to a college where students don't protest. And so for me, making this case is our best shot to convince Cephalus to let his kids talk with Socrates, right? We're telling Cephalus, or the people who can pay the bills, we could say, listen, this is a chance for your student, your child, to become a leader. That last point, teaching young people to lead. John Henry Newman wrote a book called The Idea of a University, and he delivered these lectures when he was explaining the University of Dublin and trying to convince working class parents to pay tuition to send their kids to University of Dublin. And his argument was, you want to teach your kids to know how to feel, your kids, how to feel comfortable talking to other people, how to lead clubs, how to feel confident going to Italy, going to England, about how to, teach themselves overnight or over a weekend, certain basics like statistical methods, or, basic rudiments of a foreign language. So I think that that's a great strategy, right? If you're trying to figure out how to defend higher education. And when you defend higher education, you say, if you like all these good things, then you need to defend academic freedom, which is a core part of it. So that's my lecture. It's a real honor for me to participate in a conversation with Pat Oker. She is a 19th century American literature scholar, and she was the former president of New College of Florida. Prior to New College, she was a faculty member and academic leader at the University of Missouri and served as dean of the College of Arts and Science. One thing she did with students was exercise and lift weights, which I thought was pretty awesome. Now she is a leadership coach for academic leaders. She speaks and writes on higher education issues. So I'm really excited to have a conversation with President Oker.
Thank you, Nick. Can you hear me okay?
You're fine.
Awesome. So I want to thank you for these 3 lectures. I so appreciate your ability in a relatively short amount of time to take us way back through the history and then also connect it to very current debates. So thank you so much. I really enjoyed the series. And what I thought I wanted to do today during our short time to discuss is you offered some suggestions of how we can improve the reputation of academic freedom and really get more champions. And I will say that I prefer the language of how to champion academic freedom rather than defending it, because I think we should be more joyful and boisterous about how wonderful it is, and rather than something we have to defend. It seems a little negative to me. But what I want to do is just flesh out, throw out a few ideas of other things that we can do to gather more support for academic freedom. But mine is going to be to turn inside towards higher ed ourselves. So rather than think about what we have to convince other people, it's like, what can we do and what would change? And really the big thing that I want to just throw out and get your feedback, I'd love your thoughts on this, is academic freedom is not well understood by the public, and I would argue not even by faculty. And I don't know what, I'm curious to know what your thoughts are about the kind of shorthand definition that we sometimes hear faculty say. I hear this all the time of, what's academic freedom? And people will say things like, well, I get to teach what I want. I find that definition woefully inadequate to explain the complexity of academic freedom. And as you pointed out in your lectures, it's the incredible foundation of US higher education. And so, and it doesn't sell well on Main Street. Like, who gets to do whatever they want at their job? I mean, it's a hard sell. And so one of the things that I'd like to suggest is that we as faculty members and scholars and academics need to change our language of how we talk about academic freedom, which is not to change what the principle is, but how we talk about it. And in particular, I'm interested in 2 things. One is, can we get some students in here? Like, involve students and place. There's so much attention in the 1940 document and how we talk about it as the rights of faculty. But in the 1940 document from AAUP, it also includes the freedom that students have, freedom in learning. And I think many people, and so I'm not saying that students benefit from being in an environment which is born in and lives in a culture of academic freedom. And if we can do more to talk about the ways in which students benefit from academic freedom. Right now, it sounds like, oh, so faculty members get to teach what they want, and they can criticize the government if they want. Again, that's the shorthand that sometimes people, but I think that's inadequate. If we can talk about the ways in which students benefit from the freedom in learning about things that other people say, I don't know if that's valuable. Like, I have a huge confidence in the benefit of students being able to explore topics which turn out to be, you're not sure, are they, like, they haven't been time tested yet. That's how discovery takes place. You go down a rabbit hole and you go, oh, this one didn't work out, right? So thinking about ways in which students benefit, I think that would be terrific. The other point, and then I'll get your feedback and we can have a conversation about it, is as we maybe change our language about how we talk about academic freedom, could we go out and use the structures that we have already in place about outreach? So there's faculty members giving speeches and talks and all over the place, in all different places, right? Could we not spend 2 or 5 minutes in all of those of talking about, I just want to tell you what academic freedom is. It's in the news a lot. Here's what it is, and here's how my students, forget about how you benefit, here's how my students benefit from academic freedom. And I think that I guess I should have looked up the numbers. The hundreds of thousands of teachers in the United States, if we're talking about how our students benefit from academic freedom, I think we can build support across all kinds of political divides. And it's not about defending the most outrageous faculty speech, which is an issue that scholars and lawyers have to debate. But that's not necessarily the thing we need to be talking about is the most extreme, right? We should be talking about the nuts and bolts of our students have freedom in learning about things without the government or saying, oh, you can't study that. Like I teach things that I find offensive all the time. Like you read books, right? Like that's just, I'm a 19th century scholar. Let me tell you, there's a gazillion things that are offensive about pre-Civil War. I love pre-Civil War 19th America, but there's lots of things that are offensive and we read them and we study them. So let me stop there and get your thoughts about, is there some benefit from talking about the student experience and maybe doing a little less defending and a little bit more championing? What do you think?
Well, oh, that's great. No, that's great. And there's a lot there. So maybe I won't get it all in
Sure.
one reply, but I'll get started here. Yeah, no, I be aggressive, be aggressive, right? Be champions, be advocates, fight for it. I have an editor who says I like authors who go on the offensive. And so like I think that's good, right? We
In a
need
joyful way.
in a joyful way and laugh and fun and right you be a little rebellious, right? So I think that yeah, you 100% convinced me that. I guess one question I would say, I'm gonna say two things. One is that I'm ambivalent a little bit about explaining academic freedom in public. I read a really interesting article by Richard Rorty called "Does Academic Freedom Need Philosophical Presuppositions?" And what he was arguing is that we shouldn't really try to explain why higher education works because people either like it or don't. And at this point, it's been around for a long time, and you got to just be able to point to things and say, this is a good thing. So, I'm academic. I'm thinking with other academics primarily about how do we, what in our own mind, what is our own clarity about like why we're defending this. But I guess what I would try to say is let's show people the advantage of students being entrepreneurial, of doing independent research, right? So I could try to explain to them the history of doing research and say, it didn't really exist in the colonial colleges, right? It didn't exist really until the research university started in the late 19th century in America with Johns Hopkins and then University of Chicago, then Harvard, then Cornell, and then Columbia. And then at a certain point, everybody did it, right? I think we need to do advertising campaigns that say, here's the great things that can happen when you go to college. You get to do independent research. And, that's one thing I believe. It's a great selling point. I'm thinking of Fordham, which we really emphasize the opportunities for student research. So we don't explain why we do it, we just do it. And students benefit and they go on to do really interesting things. So I'm the faculty advisor to the Fordham Political Review, which is like an opinion magazine. It's glossy, it's nice, it's edited, but it's fascinating to watch. The students write for it, then go on to really interesting things. So in a certain way, I see Rorty's point that you could explain why you have this glossy magazine, or you could just say, young people who do it, they launch off into really exciting things. One of my students is the book review assistant editor at the Wall Street Journal. One of them is a major financial reporter. Other of them are in law school. They're doing interesting things. But let me just say one final point, and then I want to hear what you say. I see the problem of emphasizing too much the limit cases, the Morrow Finkelsteins, the George Ciccarello Mayer, the Stephen Salaita, right? He was the situation at University of Illinois who he got the job, but before he started, he tweeted, and then trustees saw it. They told the president, he got fired. So those numbers are small, but I think that they're still important. I think we still need to emphasize them. And even for students, one of the major controversies in higher education right now is whether universities should have branches of the Students for Justice in Palestine. And so I think we should emphasize to students the benefits of lots of choices of clubs, that there's Asian Engineering Club or there's the Outreach Club or the Tutoring Club. So those are all good, but I still think that it's pretty important to say we got to, even for students, we got to protect those more extreme clubs and we got to protect those extreme professors who sort of invigorate the college atmosphere.
To be clear, I'm not advocating that we give the history or the philosophical definitions. I don't think that's useful. But I
Right.
do think it would be useful for us as teachers to talk about how academic freedom works in our classrooms. Because
No,
what we're being accused of
right.
is indoctrinating students. And if we tell stories of how our students, if I share a book with a student and I pick the syllabus, I write the syllabus, I pick a book. I don't require my students to have any particular view of that book. And in fact, to demonstrate over and over again the ways in which students will, in amazingly surprising and lovely ways, find new angles that no one, new things that have been discovered, disagree with each other, and that the nature of that exploration is part of what goes on in the classroom. Because when the definition of academic freedom becomes, I get to teach what I want, it's so easy to turn into, and then I tell students what to think about it, which is
Right.
not what happens in the classroom. And I know that you know that, but the public does not know that. And so if I want to take that to the streets, I think that every faculty member that I know has stories about how there was this incredible class discussion about debating this, and there's often no resolution. It used to drive me crazy as when I first went to college. I was like, well, what's the answer? And of course,
Right.
I had to grow up a little bit. And I want to talk about it in those rich ways with the what happens in the classroom. I just think, and outside the classroom too, but among students and not just faculty speech. I do know we're supposed to encourage people to have some questions. People can use the question and answer. Is that right?
Yeah, no, that'd be great. I'd be happy to, people type in questions. We got some great ones last time. One person wrote, I suspect that viewpoint diversity can be used to undermine scholarly method. So viewpoints by people who reject empirical truth-seeking methods would have to be on faculties. Um, I mean, if I understand the point, I've been reading Joan Wallach Scott and Judith Butler, and they both wrote essays on academic freedom, and they're wary of defining academic freedom as contributing to the accumulation of scholarly knowledge, and so yeah, I think I'm definitely cognizant that and I think Robert Post is the main person who makes that defense. And so both Judith Butler and Joan Wallach Scott are sort of nervous about that definition of academic freedom that, we get to pursue truth. And then all of a sudden you have all those epistemological debates about what truth is. And so, yeah, no, um, I would not emphasize the truth thing. I don't know about the viewpoint diversity. I want to see what it looks like in practice. I mean, um, and I don't want to go too much into details of my own story, but like, there have been movements to sort of police syllabi. And I mean, that's I reach for my revolver. Like, do not tell me what to teach. I agree with you, Pat, that academic freedom doesn't mean to just get to do what you want. I mean, part of the thing that the AAPU document really emphasizes is that academics have to discipline themselves or other people will discipline them, right? So if you're grading unfairly, if you're harassing students, if you're not covering the material that's in your discipline, the academic community can respond to that.
And to be fair, I would say that we have not, as academics, done our due diligence in that regard in all times, right? There's a reluctance at times to put in some parameters of our colleagues. People don't like doing that. And so I think we, as I'm not currently teaching, but I still consider myself a teacher, that's one way in which I think that we can do better, of, I don't love the discipline word there, but of, I don't know, working together to ensure that things are appropriate. And of course, the AUP document is very clear about the parameters, that there are parameters of what we teach, and that's already embedded in our kind of standing documents.
So Pat, may I ask you a question? So if I
Sure.
understand your point correctly about teaching literature, and I mean, I think I try to do a similar thing. I read John Stuart Mill's On Liberty my first semester of college. It's the importance of engaging perspectives you disagree with, because they could be entirely right, partly right, but even if they're wrong, you get your own thinking clear when you engage people you disagree with. So the comments that I love on Rate My Professor or my student evaluations where, it's fair to position lots of different positions. And for me, that's like an ethic. That's an ethic of
Yeah.
many, right? That's ethic of many-sidedness, right? That you could always be like, I can look at it from two different ways, and I'm not going to be dogmatic. I'm going to be open-minded, and I'm going to let my students say what they think, and I'm going to treat them seriously like adults, and they'll forget the books I assigned, but hopefully they'll remember that I treated them
Sure.
with
Yeah.
respect. But so my question for you is this: do you have any ideas about how to get the wider population more sympathetic to what universities are about?
I think it really is just to lean in on the idea that I mentioned before. I think people don't understand what it is that goes on in our classrooms. I think, um, and being a teacher can be such a solitary endeavor in terms of, we don't visit each other's classes, or if we do, it's a big thing. You get observed, and people, like it's not like people just drop in classes all the time. And so I think the public doesn't understand the extent to which people debate. And what the example that I would give is, I know women's and gender studies is a field that is under attack right now for so-called indoctrinating students. Now, I took my first women's studies course probably in the late 70s, early 80s, and I've been a scholar of women's literature my entire career. So I feel like I know my way around this space. And let me tell you, I have never had such rigorous debates as I've had in women's studies. Like, just knock down fights over arguing about points and disagreeing, all in like wonderfully supportive ways, but real serious intellectual arguments. And the idea that I was indoctrinated by that, I was like, I saw the possibility of really engaging in incredible debate around a topic that we all cared about. And so I think that's true of any subject, that even when you think about something from a scientific, and is this good scholarship, is this good research, scientists disagree and they debate about what's the methodology, and so the rigors of debate. I just think people don't know that that's what happens in our classroom. They think it's what, kind of a version of, maybe, I don't know, a bad movie version of like, memorize these facts and give them back to me. That's not what happens in my classrooms, and I know it's not what happens in yours.
Yeah. No, that I mean, that's a challenge that I think, I mean, if you look at my CV and maybe try to find a through line, if people wanted to do that, it really is we've got this beautiful little space, and we need to try to figure out how to protect it. And, sometimes I do public outreach to try to recreate in the classroom for the broader public, right? So, I mean, I wrote an article about Fortnite once, the popular video game. And like there was a YouTube video of some gamers, they literally would read every sentence and then respond. And it got seen, I think like the last time I checked, several 100,000 times. I don't know
That's
if it's still up.
that's awesome.
Yeah, no, it's good. Like, but like that's me. I'm really trying to be like,
Yeah.
listen, I want to try because I love the small classroom. I'm at my happiest when I'm in a seminar table, but sometimes I'm just like, I need to figure out how to convince the public that this is a worthwhile thing.
It's worthwhile.
Um, yeah, let me read this question.
Nick, we have another comment here, it looks like.
Yeah, one of the criticisms of universities has been that student demonstrations have impinged on the learning of other students, such as by blocking classrooms or drowning out classes or particular speakers? Do you think colleges and universities have done enough of communicating guidelines for appropriate expressions of opinions, whether individually in class or at lecture or in a public protest or demonstration on campus, and the consequences of following those guidelines? No, that's a very good question. One of the groups that I've sort of follow religiously on Twitter and social media is FIRE, Freedom for Individual Research and Expression, or something like that, FIRE. And they make it pretty clear that you can't physically stop speakers from presenting. You certainly can't block people from getting into and out of campus. Um, so yeah, I definitely, I just think I don't know if a legal or policy thing. I think it's counterproductive to yell down speakers. I look back and to my own sort of position at my own university and wish I had spoken up a little bit more about guest speakers who were uninvited from campus for being too controversial. And I wish I had sort of spoken up. I think it's like I was trying to get with the slide of Robbie George and Cornell West. I think it's important to feel that everybody feels like their faction is represented on college campuses, that, everybody in New York City can come to Fordham for something, for a political debate or for an educational thing. So I think it's very imprudent to not allow people to come to campus. I mean, I don't know what your thinking is. I mean, I don't like some of this. I think there have been some staged episodes where people could very easily walk around, right? I don't think you have a right to make people jump out of your way when you're walking on sidewalks. And I think so I don't love those kind of trying to gotcha moments for social media of like protesters. I think part of the First Amendment. So, First Amendment is we have the right to peaceably assemble. And so, I think colleges should encourage protests. One of my colleagues at Fordham, Zain Murib, they talk about how time and place regulations can be a way to regulate protest and basically make it impossible to have protests. So I don't want time and place regulations to be so onerous that 30 days notice, room reservation, security, funding, you can make enough regulations that you effectively make protest impossible on campus. So I'm against that. I think colleges historically have been places for rebellion, for protests. I want to see that. Violence is unacceptable. Taking over buildings you got to be very careful. I mean, you're Pat saying
I
no.
say no.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, I suppose there are some circumstances, but violence is unacceptable. I will go a little bit farther and say I do think that we need to do a better job of one, recognizing that protests are designed to be disruptive, right? Like, so we
Right.
just have to talk about that. That is the nature of what a protest is. It's supposed to be disruptive. But that people in administrative roles also have a responsibility to protect the learning environment of other students. And so yes, it's always a balancing act and there's always details, but yes, recognize protests. But I think colleges do need to do a better job of ahead of time, before the protests, making sure that students do know, and other people as well, not just students, about what the consequences are of disrupting in a certain way in the classroom.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I'm torn because I don't know how to navigate this
It's
situation
hard.
because it is, yeah, that's a
So
good.
I'll give an example of one which I thought was, it's not just about policies and rules, but about how you handle the protests. And times were very different. But I was working in the provost's office during the 2015 protests at the University of Missouri, and the protesters marched through the main administrative building and with a bullhorn, and it was disruptive to the people were not taking classes there. So maybe I would have let that go a little bit, but there was some concern about that. And so somebody reached out and said, could you march through the building and drop the bullhorn? We never saw the bullhorn again. And I'm like,
Okay.
Okay, so it was still disruptive, and there were some people who said, I don't feel comfortable with the protesters walking through. And I was like, well, I understand that, but there was outreach to protesters and finding ways of that just it struck me at that particular moment. There was much about that that did not go well at all. But that one particular incident is like reaching out to the student leaders and to say, could you not use the megaphone, and they did that. And so again, times were very different, perhaps. Perhaps.
Yeah, no, I mean it's the I feel the same way about some of these protests that I do about ill-considered social media posts. Like, I think I'll defend them, even though I think that there's so many other productive ways to do things, right? Hannah Arendt wouldn't let her students leave class at the University of Chicago to protest the Vietnam War. Like, what we do is important. You should come to class, and Gilles Deleuze was the same way. He's like, I don't want people protesting. I want them to finish their dissertation. Like, so I don't know. I mean,
Or accept the consequences stoically, I say. Sometimes, people like historically, people do choose to break the law.
yeah,
And there's lots of people who say, I'm going to break the law and then accept the consequences of that.
yeah.
I mean, that is, yeah. Again, it's far more complicated, and my opinion about the nuances of this is way more complicated than I can expect. But to the speaker's question, I do think we can do a better job of making sure that students are aware way ahead of time of the importance and the value. For me, it's all about values. We value people with different points of view. And
Yeah.
rather than a rule, it's a value that we protect our community this way.
All right, everybody. Well, I think I'll wrap it up. It was a real pleasure to have this conversation for these three lectures. I'm really grateful to Mary Ruiz. I'm grateful to Mary and to Stephen and to Pat Oker for being a discussant. Thank you for watching. And if you have any messages you'd like to send me an email. Tampio@fordham.edu. Have a great rest of your day.